"You don't belong here." Grant Rourke said it loud enough for every man on that beach to hear. Loud enough that the instructors turned their heads. Loud enough that the cold Pacific wind carried it straight into Mara Ellison's face like a slap. She didn't flinch, she didn't argue. She just looked at him the way a surgeon looks at a problem, calmly, completely, and without a single wasted emotion. Nobody on that beach knew what she had already survived. Nobody knew what was sealed inside her service record. And nobody, not one man standing on that cold sand, was ready for what came next. Subscribe to our channel right now and follow every part of Mara's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The bus didn't announce anything. It rolled through the gate at 4:37 in the morning and stopped with a hydraulic sigh. And the men on it were already moving before the doors fully opened, duffels hitting the ground, boots finding the pavement, bodies organizing themselves into the unconscious hierarchy that forms whenever competitive people gather in a dark place. They had trained for this moment for months, some of them for years. Every one of them believed, in the private architecture of their own confidence, that they were ready. Mara Ellison was the last one off the bus. She didn't rush. She carried one bag, wore no rank insignia beyond what regulations required, and stepped onto the tarmac at Naval Special Warfare Command's training complex in Coronado, California, with the particular stillness of someone who had already made peace with whatever was coming. 28 years old, blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painted on. A lean build that the cold morning air moved through like it barely registered her presence. The men noticed immediately. Of course they noticed. There wasn't a single one among them who didn't do the math the second her boot touched the ground. The only woman in the class, standing in a place where women had almost never stood, in a program where most men didn't finish. Nobody said anything yet. But the silence itself was loud. The candidate staging area smelled like salt air and diesel exhaust. Someone had set up portable lighting that made everyone look slightly too pale, slightly too young, slightly too fragile for what was about to happen to them. There were 31 candidates in Mara's assessment group. By the end of the first week, the instructors had calculated, not as cruelty but as statistical reality, that fewer than half would still be standing. Mara looked at the ocean. She couldn't see it from where she stood, but she could feel it, the weight of it, the smell of it, the way it had always been there in the background of every serious decision she'd ever made. She had a relationship with deep water that none of these men could have guessed at, and she had no intention of explaining it. Master Chief Nolan Strickland appeared at the edge of the formation like a man who had materialized from the pre-dawn dark rather than walked out of a building. He was 51 years old, built like something that had been compressed under enormous pressure until it became more dense than the original material. And he had the particular quality of experienced military instructors, the ability to make silence feel like a physical weight pressing down on your shoulders. He looked at the class. Then he looked at Mara, not longer than he looked at anyone else. Not with contempt, not with approval. Just with the measured attention of a man conducting an inventory, filing what he saw and reserving judgment for events rather than appearances. "This course," he said, and his voice was the kind of voice that didn't need volume to fill a space, "will find every lie you've told yourself about who you are. Not just the physical ones, all of them. The ones about your patience, your judgment, your ego, especially your ego." He paused. "The Pacific Ocean will not care about your feelings. It will not adjust its standards because you had a hard week. It will not give you credit for showing up. Showing up is the minimum. What happens after showing up is what this course is actually about." Nobody moved. "Fall in," Strickland said, "and understand that everything after this sentence is an evaluation." The first evolution began before sunrise. Inflatable boats, IBS. The 7-man rubber craft that became a kind of medieval torture device when filled with water and lifted onto 6 sets of exhausted shoulders were distributed to boat crews. Each crew was responsible for their craft as though it were a living thing, because in training its performance directly reflected their own. Mara was assigned to boat crew 4, 6 other men, none of whom she had met before that morning, who ranged from cautiously neutral to visibly hostile in their initial assessment of her. Grant Rourke was the loudest. He was 29 years old, Fleet Navy, had completed 2 back-to-back deployments on surface ships and spent the better part of 4 years preparing his body for this exact program. He was legitimately excellent, physically powerful, technically sharp, the kind of candidate who scored well on every metric that could be measured before the water got cold and the hours got long. He also had the particular confidence of a man who believed the world should reflect the order he had already decided it contained. When the instructor told Boat Crew 4 to lift their IBS onto their heads for the first carry evolution, Grant looked at Mara with something that wasn't quite contempt and wasn't quite curiosity. It was the expression of a man doing a calculation and arriving at a number he didn't like. "You good?" he asked, and the way he said it made the question mean the opposite of what the words said. "I'm fine," Mara said. "Because this thing weighs over 200 pounds. I know what it weighs, and he stopped himself. "Just barely. Then I just need to know my crew is solid." "Then watch the evolution," she said. Instead of watching me, the boat went up. Mara took her position on the left side, feeling the rubber pressing into the meat of her left shoulder, the damaged one. The one that had been rebuilt with surgical hardware and 18 months of physical therapy after the accident, and she did not allow the expression on her face to change by a single degree. She was not fine. The shoulder ached with an immediate, sharp specificity, like something inside it was reminding her exactly what had been done to it, and exactly how far it still had from fully healed. She breathed through it. She kept pace. She did not fall out of step. They carried the boat a quarter mile, then into the surf, then out again, then back to the staging area, where an instructor told them they had 90 seconds to regroup before the next evolution began. Grant, breathing hard, looked across the boat at her. His jaw was tight. He said nothing. Mara didn't look back at him. She was already checking the grip handles on the port side, making sure the rigging hadn't loosened during the carry, making herself useful before he could find a reason to say she wasn't. By the second day, the predictions began. They were made in the casual, certainty-soaked tones of men who had decided the outcome before the evidence was in. Grant was the primary source, but he wasn't the only one. During a rest period between a timed ocean swim and a log carry evolution, he sat with two other candidates, a large, quiet man named Pacheco and a former college wrestler named Dillard, and said what he'd been building toward since the first morning. "If she's done by Friday," he said, "I'll put money on it." 3 days. "She doesn't have the base for this." Pacheco looked uncomfortable. "She carried her end of the boat. She carried it slower than everyone else. If we'd had to run that last 50 meters, she would have dropped it." Grant shook his head. "I've got nothing against her personally. I'm talking about physics. This course isn't built for what?" Pacheco said carefully. Grant looked at him. "For people who can't physically hack it." "I'm not saying anything else." But he was. Everyone at that rest stop understood what else he was saying, and every word of it reached Mara, who was 40 feet away performing shoulder rotations that her physical therapist had specifically told her to do 3 times daily to maintain mobility in the joint. She heard it. She cataloged it. She filed it in the same part of herself where she kept every other piece of information that was relevant, but couldn't be acted on yet, because there was something Mara understood about Grant Rourke that Grant Rourke didn't yet understand about himself. His certainty was his greatest vulnerability, and certainty in a training environment that was specifically designed to destroy comfortable assumptions was a structural flaw waiting to express itself. She would not need to defeat him. She would only need to outlast him. On the 3rd day, Eli Navarro found a reason to talk to her. He was a Navy hospital corpsman, 31, quieter than almost anyone else in the class, with the patient, detail-oriented observation style of a man trained to notice things that other people overlooked. He had been watching her since the first morning, not with the aggressive skepticism of Grant's crowd, but with the focused attention of someone assembling a more complicated picture. During a brief break between evolutions, he sat down next to her on the sand and offered her a piece of trail mix from a sealed bag he'd apparently been concealing in a way that didn't violate any technical regulations, but absolutely violated the spirit of them. "You're studying the tides," he said. It wasn't a question. Mara glanced at him. "Excuse me? Every time we're near the water and we get more than 30 seconds standing still, you're watching the water movement, reading the current patterns. Most guys are just trying not to fall asleep on their feet." She took the trail mix. "Habit. From what?" She was quiet for a moment. "EOD," she finally said. "Explosive ordnance disposal. Dive work specifically." He nodded slowly, processing this. "That's a different kind of intense than fleet sailor." "Different everything," she agreed. Eli looked out toward the water. "I've seen you adjusting your carry position on the IBS. You're compensating for something on the left side." "Shoulder? Are you evaluating me?" "I'm a corpsman," he said simply. "I evaluate everyone." Professionally, Mara met his eyes. "If I needed medical attention, I would report it." "I'm not saying you do. I'm saying I see what you're managing and I think you're managing it well. That's different from not managing anything." He paused. "Also, you checked Dillard's hands after the log carry yesterday. He had a developing blister under his right palm that he was going to ignore until it became infected. You pointed it out to him. He would have noticed eventually. He would have noticed when it got infected and he doored because of an infected hand." Eli folded the trail mix bag with the methodical precision of a man who folded everything. "You've been taking care of people since this class started." Quietly, without making it a moment, Mara didn't answer that directly. She studied the water for a few seconds. "The tide's pulling south," she said finally. "If they run the coastal navigation exercise the way I think they will, the southern checkpoint is going to be harder to hit than it looks on the chart. The current's going to push the boats wide." Eli looked at the water, then back at her. "You going to tell the instructors? It's an assessment," she said. "I'm going to tell my boat crew." "Rourke leads boat crew 4. I know, he's not exactly receptive to information that comes from you." Mara was quiet for a moment. "Then I'll present it in a way that makes it easy for him to believe it was his idea." Eli studied her. "That's not something most people can do," he said. "Especially not people who are actively being dismissed. Most people haven't spent 3 years disabling explosive devices in zero visibility water," she said. "You learn to want the mission to succeed more than you want the credit." The 4th day brought cold that had specificity to it, not just temperature, but the penetrating, relentless coastal California chill that got into the spaces between your joints and stayed there. The surf immersions began at 500, and by the 4th entry into the water, several candidates were showing early signs of hypothermia. The instructors watched. That was their job, to watch, to assess, to intervene only when medical necessity demanded it, and to accept the uncomfortable reality that some degree of suffering was the cost of the training's validity. Mara had a higher cold tolerance than most people expected. It wasn't genetic luck. It was the product of hundreds of hours of underwater work in temperatures that made this look like a heated pool. Her body had learned, through years of controlled exposure, to manage its core temperature more efficiently than bodies that had only ever been warm. She did not advertise this. She shook when shaking was appropriate. She moved with the same controlled urgency as her teammates. She did not allow herself to appear comfortable in conditions that were supposed to be difficult, because appearing comfortable in front of struggling teammates was its own kind of cruelty. But when Dillard came out of the 4th immersion with his lips the wrong color and his hands no longer obeying his instructions completely, Mara saw it immediately. She moved to his position during the brief recovery period and began the specific friction techniques she had learned during dive training to accelerate peripheral circulation. Not dramatic, not obviously medical, just close contact and intentional pressure that looked like two tired people leaning against each other for warmth. Dillard looked at her. His teeth were chattering badly enough that his words had gaps in them. "I'm good, keep your hands moving," she said quietly. "Open and close. Just keep them moving. Is that actually helping? Your hands are going to need to work in about 4 minutes when they start the next evolution," she said. So yes, he did what she told him. When the next evolution began, his hands worked. He didn't say thank you. He just gave her a single look that was worth more than thank you, because it contained acknowledgement, the recognition of one human being, that another human being had noticed them and chosen to help. Grant, watching from across the formation, saw the interaction. Something moved in his expression, not admiration. Not yet. But something less certain than what had been there before. The 5th day brought the evolution that nearly ended everything. The underwater confidence drill was designed to test not physical strength but psychological durability, the ability to remain functional when every survival instinct in the human body was screaming to surface. To abort, to prioritize breathing over mission, candidates were required to perform specific underwater tasks while managing their air supply, navigating a partially submerged obstacle course, and most critically remaining calm when equipment malfunctions occurred, because the instructors induced equipment malfunctions. That was the point. Mara entered the water knowing what was coming and knowing, in the most private part of herself, what it might trigger. She had completed hundreds of underwater evolutions. She had disarmed ordnance in conditions that would have made this drill look like a swimming lesson. She understood the mechanics of controlled breathing, of managed panic, of the specific mental discipline that separated functional fear from paralytic fear. None of that knowledge had ever fully addressed what happened to her body and mind when she was in confined water with compromised breathing equipment. Because the last time that had happened, Aaron Vale had not come back up. Chief Aaron Vale had been her dive partner for 2 years. He was 34 years old, had a daughter who liked horses, and a laugh that you could hear from the other side of a building. They had worked together in water that frightened both of them, on devices that could have ended both of them, and they had trusted each other with the specific, wordless depth that only comes from shared proximity to things that can kill you. The equipment failure that took Aaron was small, an O-ring seal and a rebreather valve, the kind of failure that happened once in 1,000 dives, that every diver knew existed theoretically, and that none of them could actually make themselves believe would happen to them specifically. It happened. Aaron breathed a mixture that his body rejected. By the time Mara reached him and began the ascent protocol, the window had closed. She had performed every correct action. She had done everything her training told her to do. And he had still died. That was the knowledge that lived inside her left shoulder, inside the scar tissue and the surgical hardware and the 18 months of physical therapy. That was the weight she carried onto every bus and into every evolution. The reason her service record had a gap in it that was described with careful, almost defensive vagueness. The tangled breathing hose hit her in the middle of the underwater obstacle course. It snagged on a submerged support strut, pulled against the regulator in a specific way that replicated not exactly, but closely enough the feeling of Aaron's equipment failing in her hands. The water closed around the memory the way water closes around everything. Mara froze, not long. 3 seconds, maybe surface time. Nothing. In underwater time, with the breathing hose tangled and the oxygen count running and the memory pressing in from every direction in eternity, she ran the protocol. Not because she felt it, but because her hands knew it, and her hands had learned to work even when the rest of her had gone somewhere else. She located the snag with her fingers. She tracked the tangle from origin to point of restriction. She released the hose in the correct sequence: do not pull, do not force, read the tangle, find the solution, and brought it clear. She surfaced with the correct body position. She reported the equipment issue to the safety observer in the correct format. She did all of it exactly right. But Master Chief Strickland was standing at the pool deck, and he had watched her eyes go somewhere for those 3 or 4 seconds, and he had seen what panic looked like in someone who was actively fighting it, and he was too experienced to pretend he hadn't. He waited until the other candidates had cleared the area before he approached her. She was sitting on the pool deck, wringing water from her sleeves with the methodical efficiency of someone who had run out of emotion and was now operating entirely on procedure. "Ellison," he said. She looked up. "What happened down there?" She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said something that no candidate at this stage of training typically said, because candidates at this stage of training were still trying to prove that nothing had happened, that they were fine, that the course had not found them yet. "I froze," she said. Strickland studied her. "For how long?" 3, 4 seconds, I don't know exactly. "Long enough." "Long enough for what?" "Long enough to know it happened." He crouched down to her level, which he did not do for most people. "Ellison, what is it about confined water with compromised equipment that gets into you?" She looked at him. She made a decision. It was the kind of decision that felt like stepping off a ledge, because there was no taking it back once you did it. "Chief Aaron Vale," she said, 3 years ago. Equipment failure during a training dive. I did everything right and he still didn't come back up." She paused. "That's what's down there." Strickland was quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't empty, it was full of something being processed and weighed with care. "You want to tell me you're over it," he said finally. "That it won't happen again." "No," she said. "I don't want to tell you that." He looked at her with something that was recalibrating in real time. "Then what do you want to tell me?" Mara was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then she said, "I want to tell you that I'm afraid. And I want to tell you that I can still be responsible while I'm afraid. And I want to tell you that the difference between those 2 things is why I'm here." She held his gaze. "Fear wasn't the problem in that pool. I froze because the fear arrived before I could route it correctly. But I routed it. I completed the protocol. I surfaced correctly. The fear was present and I was still functional." She looked down at her hands. "That's all I'm promising, not that the fear goes away. That it doesn't stop me from doing what needs to be done." Strickland looked at her for a long time. Long enough that she could feel the weight of it. Long enough that she had time to wonder if she'd just talked herself out of the course. Then he stood. "If that past of yours," he said, quiet and ever puts this class in danger, if one candidate suffers because you were somewhere else when they needed you here, I will remove you myself. That's not a threat." "Understood," she said. "Are you currently capable of continuing?" She met his eyes.
Yes,
He nodded once, then get back in the line. "Ellison," she stood. She walked back toward the formation. She did not look at the pool again, because looking at it would have been asking it to take something from her. And she was done letting that particular piece of water take things. Grant was standing near the back of the formation when she passed him. He had clearly heard part of the exchange, or had heard enough to understand the shape of it. He said nothing for a moment. Then unexpectedly, "You actually froze?" His tone wasn't mocking. It was confused, like a man encountering information that didn't fit the model he'd been using. "Yes," she said without breaking stride. "And you just told him that?" "Straight out?" "Yes." He stared at her. "Why?" She stopped, turned, looked at him with the steady directness that had been her default setting since she stepped off the bus. "Because I want to be someone that my team can trust completely," she said. "And the only way that works is if I'm honest about what I'm actually managing. Not what I want you to think I'm managing." She held his eyes for a moment longer, then turned and walked back to her position. Grant watched her go. Something in his face was doing complicated work that he didn't have the vocabulary for yet. That evening, Eli found her during the brief window between the day's final evolution and lights out, when the candidates were supposed to be eating and tending to their equipment, but what they mostly did was sit very still and let the exhaustion metabolize through them like a toxin. "I heard what happened at the pool," he said. "Word travels. This class is 31 people in a 60-foot staging area. Everything travels." He sat down. "How are you? Managing?" That's not an answer. She looked at him. There was something about Eli's attention that was different from most people's. It didn't want anything from her. It didn't need her to perform wellness or competence or strength. It just looked patient and careful, the way a good medic looks at a patient. "I'm scared," she said. "Not of the course. Of the specific thing that's in the water for me." She paused. "But I know what to do with it now. I didn't before tonight." "Aaron Vale," he said. She looked at him sharply. "I looked up your service records public portions," he said. "There's a gap. EOD training accident 3 years ago." I put it together. "I'm sorry. You don't need to be sorry. You're a corpsman. You research things." "I'm sorry about Vale." "Not about the research." Mara was quiet for a moment. "He was good," she said. "He was so good at everything. That's the part that stays with me, not just that he's gone, but that someone that good, that careful, that experienced, he did everything right too. We both did everything right and it still happened." She breathed out. "This course, the reason I'm here is because after Aaron, I stopped being sure I could function in critical moments. I needed to know whether fear was going to own me forever, or whether I could learn to own it back." Eli nodded slowly. "And tonight?" She almost smiled. "Tonight I froze for 4 seconds and then completed the protocol correctly," she said. "That's not a victory, but it's data," he nodded. "That's a very EOD way to describe surviving your own former EOD," she said. "Current, whatever this is." He stood, stretched, groaned with the complete sincerity of a man whose body had been used hard for many consecutive days. "You know what's interesting," he said, "is that you came here because you weren't sure you could function in critical moments. And you've spent 5 days quietly functioning for everyone around you." She looked up at him. "That's different, is it?" She thought about that. "When it's for someone else," she said, "the fear gets quieter. There's too much to do." Eli looked at her for a long moment. "I'll see you at 430, he said. "See you at 430, she said. He walked away. She sat in the dark for a few more minutes, listening to the distant rhythm of the Pacific, the ocean that didn't care who she was, that would not lower its standards, that had taken Aaron, and had given her back alive with the kind of complicated debt that survivor's guilt makes you feel you can never fully repay. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear Grant Rourke going over the next day's schedule with Dillard and Pacheco. She heard her name mentioned once in a tone that was no longer certain. Good, she thought. Certainty that lives in a man's throat and not in his actions is the most dangerous kind. The kind that gets people hurt. Out on the water, somewhere beyond where the lights reached, a storm was beginning to form, not the kind anyone was talking about yet. The kind that starts at the edges of things quietly, with intentions it takes days to fully reveal. Mara felt it the way she always felt water before it moved against her. She filed it, the way she filed everything useful. And she did not sleep for a long time. The morning after the pool, nobody talked about what happened directly. That was how it worked in training. The things that mattered most were the things that got processed sideways, through silence and sidelong looks, and the particular way men adjusted their behavior around someone they'd just been forced to reconsider. Grant ate his meal 3 seats away from Mara and didn't look at her once. Dillard nodded at her when she sat down. Eli handed her an extra packet of electrolytes without being asked and went back to studying his navigation notes like it was the most ordinary gesture in the world. Mara drank the electrolytes and said nothing. She was already thinking about the day ahead. The 6th day opened with a 4-mile timed run in full boots and utilities, followed immediately by a log carry that the instructors had redesigned overnight to be longer and heavier than the published schedule indicated. This was not an accident. This was the course doing what the course was specifically designed to do: remove the comfort of prediction, strip away the psychological safety of knowing what was coming, and force the candidates to perform not when they were prepared but when they weren't. Mara had known this was coming, not the specific, the principle. She had read every account of SEAL training she could find during her recovery from shoulder surgery, not to memorize the evolutions but to understand the underlying logic of the program. The point was never the log, the point was never the run. The point was always whether you could maintain your decision-making quality when every comfortable assumption had been taken away from you. She could. She had learned to in water darker and colder than anything this course would put her in. but her shoulder was not cooperating with her intentions. By mile 2 of the run, the joint was producing the specific deep ache that her physical therapist had warned her about, not the sharp surgical pain of acute damage, but the grinding, persistent signal of a structure being asked to do more than its current healing state fully supported. Mara adjusted her arm carriage, shortened her stride slightly to reduce the rotational stress on her upper body, and kept pace. Grant pulled up alongside her somewhere around mile 3. He wasn't struggling. He was built for this kind of sustained physical output, but he'd clearly positioned himself deliberately, which meant he wanted to say something and was building toward it. "Your arm is different today," he said. "I'm fine. I didn't ask if you were fine." "I said your arm is different." She glanced at him without breaking stride. "What do you want, Rourke?" He was quiet for about 30 seconds, which for Grant Rourke was practically meditative. "Then last night, what you said to Strickland about the freeze. What about it? Why did you tell him the truth?" "Because it was true." "That's not an answer. In this program, you don't volunteer weakness. You manage it and you move on and you hope nobody noticed." Mara looked at him fully for the first time since they'd started running alongside each other. "That's the difference between us," she said. "You think honesty about what you're managing is weakness. I think hiding it from the people responsible for your team's safety is the weakness." Grant said nothing, but his jaw did something complicated. "If I'd lied to Strickland," she continued, and then froze again, in a real evolution with real consequences. People could get hurt. Telling him the truth was the only option that kept this class safe. That's all I was doing. He ran beside her in silence for another quarter mile. Then, right before they hit the final stretch, "You're going to hurt that shoulder worse if you keep carrying the log on the left side," he said. "Switch to right dominant during the carry. The route's flat enough that it won't affect the team's balance." She stared at him. It was possibly the most unexpected thing he'd said since she'd arrived. "I know that," she said carefully. "Then do it," he said, and accelerated away from her toward the finish line. Mara ran the last quarter mile trying to decide what had just happened, and arriving at no clear answer, which was itself an answer of a kind. The log carry began 45 seconds after they crossed the finish line. The log weighed over 300 pounds when wet, which it always was, because the instructors ran it through the surf before handing it to the crew. Boat Crew 4 picked it up in the shoulder carry position, which put the full load across 6 sets of shoulders and demanded a level of physical coordination that went beyond individual strength into something closer to collective breathing. Everyone had to move at the same pace, absorb shock at the same moment, adjust simultaneously to changes in terrain or rhythm. Mara switched to right dominant. She felt the difference immediately: less grinding in the left joint, more load on her right side, which was fully intact and built for it. The adjustment cost her marginally in the first 200 meters, while her body recalibrated the weight distribution. Then it settled and she found the rhythm. Grant, carrying at the front of the log, couldn't see her, but he'd positioned Pacheco directly behind Mara, and Pacheco was the kind of man who understood without being told that he was being asked to watch something. The carry was a mile and a half. During the final quarter mile, an instructor named Senior Chief Dawson ran alongside Boat Crew 4 and began the particular kind of targeted harassment that the training program used to test psychological endurance under physical load, not threats, not insults exactly, but a relentless, specific, personalized commentary designed to find the fault lines in each candidate's self-belief and press on them until something gave. He found Mara immediately. Ellison, he matched their pace without visible effort. "Tell me something. You think you belong on a real team? Actual operators? You think they're going to trust their lives to someone who froze in the pool yesterday?" She kept moving. She didn't answer. "That's a real question. I want a real answer." "I completed the protocol," she said, not breaking stride. "You froze first, and then I completed the protocol in a training pool, with safety divers, with instructors watching. Not in a channel at night with a candidate going under." He let that land. "What happens when the freeze is 4 seconds too long and someone doesn't come back up?" The log shifted slightly. The whole crew felt it, a fractional loss of Mara's left side contribution as the words hit something in her that was still raw from the night before. Not collapse, not failure. Just the physical expression of a moment of psychological impact, measurable in ounces. And Grant felt it immediately from the front. "Hold your line, Crew 4," he said, loud and clean, not directed at Mara specifically, at all of them. "Hold the line, together, nobody drops." It was the right thing to say. It was the thing a crew leader says when someone on the crew is under pressure, and the solution is to distribute the load, not to add to it. Mara had not expected it from. Not today. The grip she'd lost by a fraction of an inch came back. The log didn't drop. Dawson ran with them for another 100 meters, said nothing further, peeled off at the final marker. They set the log down at the endpoint with the controlled, collective descent of people who have learned to trust each other's hands. For a moment, nobody spoke, they just breathed. Then Pacheco looked at Grant and said, "That was the right call." Grant nodded. "Let's reset." Mara didn't say anything. But when they picked up the boat handles for the next evolution, she moved to Grant's side of the carry without being asked, which put them shoulder to shoulder for the first time since the program began, and he didn't step away from it. The 7th day was the day the class started losing people. Not to injury, not yet to the bell. The withdrawal bell was a physical object brass, mounted on a post near the instructor station, sized so that its sound carried across the entire training area when struck. 3 rings meant you were done. You were removing yourself from the course voluntarily, returning to the fleet, carrying the knowledge that you had decided the cost was too high. The first candidate rang it at 630. His name was Carpenter, and he'd been struggling since day 2 with a combination of sleep deprivation and what appeared, from the outside, to be a steadily deepening crisis of motivation, the specific collapse that happens when someone has trained their body for a thing, but discovers that their reason for wanting it wasn't sufficient to carry them through the actual experience of it. He stood at the bell for almost a full minute before he struck it. 3 clean rings. Then he picked up his gear bag and walked toward the processing area, and nobody said anything to him because there was nothing to say. 2 more rang out before lunch, 4 more by evening. 7 candidates gone in a single day, which brought the class from 31 to 24, and changed the geometry of the training area. The formations were smaller, the boat crews were adjusted, the silence during meals got a different quality to it, thicker and more careful, the way silence gets when people are privately accounting for their own intentions. Grant was not struggling physically, but Mara noticed something about him during the afternoon evolutions that she filed carefully. He was getting louder. Not in a functional way, not the crew leadership calling that had steadied the log carry that morning, but in the particular, effortful way of a man who was using volume to stay ahead of a thought he didn't want to catch up with him. During the timed swim, he'd called out unnecessary corrections to his boat crew. During the navigation briefing, he'd interrupted the instructor twice, with observations that were technically accurate but not actually useful at that moment. He was performing confidence rather than deploying it, which was a meaningful distinction. Eli caught up with Mara during the brief reset between the swim and the evening run. "Rourke's spiraling," he said quietly. "I know. You know why?" She thought about it. "The bell. It's making the math real for him." Eli nodded. He came in here absolutely certain he was going to graduate. That certainty was structural for him. Now he's watched people he thought were weaker than him ring out, and it's creating doubt he doesn't have a category for. Doubt about himself, doubt about certainty as a concept, Eli said, which is worse, for a person built the way he's built. Mara looked toward where Grant was running drill sequences alone near the water's edge, with the slightly mechanical quality of someone running a subroutine rather than actually thinking. "He's going to do something in the next evolution," she said. "Something to prove something. Prove it to who himself," she said, "and probably at someone else's expense." She was right. The evening navigation exercise was supposed to be a modified coastal route teams moving along the shoreline, hitting checkpoints, managing timing windows without the assistance of GPS, relying on charts, compasses, natural landmarks, and the kind of water-reading intuition that the program tried to accelerate in candidates who didn't already have it. Mara had it. She'd had it since before the program, since years of EOD dive work that required understanding how water moved and what it meant and what it would do to you if you assumed it would stay where it was when you weren't looking at it. 3 hours into the navigation exercise, she saw the current change. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of thing you missed if you were focused on the checkpoint markers instead of the water itself, a shift in surface texture, a reorientation of the foam patterns left by breaking swells, the specific way the water's sound changes when the pull direction rotates. She'd seen it in diver training a dozen times. It meant the southern leg of the route was going to push them wide if they held their current heading. "Rourke." She moved up alongside him. "The current's changed. We need to adjust the heading by about 8 degrees east, or we're going to miss the southern checkpoint." Grant looked at her, then looked at his chart. "We're on heading. The current wasn't doing this when the chart was drawn. Watch the foam line, it's pulling southwest now. If we hold this bearing, we'll be 200 meters wide of the marker by the time we hit the checkpoint window. I've run coastal navigation before, Ellison. I know you have. I'm telling you what the water is doing right now." He looked at the water. She watched him look at it, watched him see the same thing she was describing, the same shift in surface texture that she'd caught 30 seconds earlier. She watched him understand it, and she watched him decide that understanding it, in this moment on this night from her, was something he couldn't afford. "We hold the heading," he said. Mara stopped walking. Just for a second. Just long enough to make the decision about whether to push it further, knowing that pushing it further meant either winning the argument which would publicly undercut his crew leadership or losing it and creating worse friction than already existed between them. Eli was 3 steps behind her. She heard him breathing carefully. "Waiting." "Roger," she said and kept walking. Pacheco, who had heard the entire exchange, looked at her with an expression that said he understood exactly what she'd just done and why, and that it cost something. They were 230 meters wide of the southern checkpoint when the team hit the checkpoint window. The instructors marked them late. Boat Crew 4 lost time penalties that moved them from 2nd place overall to 5th. Grant said nothing for 4 full minutes, which was how long it took them to reach the next staging area and drop their gear. Then he said, to no one in particular, "Current shifted." "Yes," Mara said, flat and without inflection. "It did." He didn't look at her. "I saw it. I know you did." Another silence. "Why didn't you push harder?" She looked at him then. "Because arguing with you in front of the crew about a navigation call you outranked me to make would have cost us more than the penalty did. Leadership isn't always right, but undermining it publicly cost more than a wrong heading does." Grant stared at her. Something was happening in his face that she recognized as a man encountering a framework he'd never been handed before. "You knew we'd missed the checkpoint," he said. "Yes. And you let it happen." "I gave you the correct information," she said carefully. "What you did with it was your call. Those aren't the same thing." He looked away. Looked back. He stopped, started again. "That's a different way of thinking about it. Most things are different from what they look like before they happen," she said. Dillard, who had been listening to this entire exchange while pretending to adjust his bootlacing, straightened up and said nothing. But he moved slightly closer to Mara's side of the group, which was, in the particular physical grammar of men who communicate in positioning rather than words, a statement of allegiance. Grant saw it, his jaw tightened. But he didn't argue. Day 8 arrived with the specific cruelty of a program that never let the previous day's lesson settle before the next one began. The surf passage drill required each candidate to enter heavy braking surf, navigate through the impact zone, reach a marker buoy, and return managing the pull of current and the force of breaking waves using only body position and timing. It was less about physical power than about reading water, which meant Mara had an advantage she hadn't asked for and that she was careful not to advertise. She went 4th in the rotation. The first 3 candidates, including Dillard, made it through with varying degrees of difficulty, all of them taking wave impacts that knocked them sideways and cost time. The technique most of them were using was force-based. Hit the wave, absorb it, push through. It worked, but barely, and it was expensive in energy they didn't have to spend. Mara timed her entry differently. She waded through 2 wave cycles at the entry point, feeling the timing interval, identifying the smallest gap in the sets. Then she went in low and fast on the back of a receding wave, using the retreating water's own momentum to carry her through the impact zone rather than fighting it. She reached the buoy with significantly less energy expenditure than anyone before her. When she came back in, she caught the next retreating wave the same way and walked up the sand without having been knocked down once. The instructors didn't comment, that wasn't their job. But 2 of them exchanged a look that contained information. Dawson, the same instructor who had targeted her during the log carry, fell into step beside her as she cleared the water. "Where'd you learn to read surf entry timing like that?" he asked. The harassing edge was gone from his voice. This was a straight question. "EOD dive work," she said. "You can't disarm something on the bottom if you can't control your entry. You learn to work with the water's movement instead of against it." Dawson nodded once. "Next rotation you're demonstrating the technique. Not because I'm doing you any favors. Because the class needs it." Mara looked at him. "You want me to instruct? I want you to show the technique." "There's a difference." "Understood," she said. She turned to move back to the staging area. Grant was standing 20 feet away, having emerged from his own surf passage 30 seconds before her. He had heard the exchange. His expression was the careful blankness of a man who was working very hard at having no reaction. Mara walked past him, close enough to speak quietly. "Your entry angle was good," she said. "You got hit on the 3rd wave because you rose too early in the impact zone. Stay lower through the backwash." She kept walking. Behind her she heard nothing for 3 full seconds. "Then how much lower?" She stopped. Turned halfway. "About this much." She demonstrated with her hand, not a large adjustment. Inches, the kind of technical refinement that looked small and felt enormous in the water. Grant studied the gesture. Nodded one. "Thanks," he said. The word came out like something he'd had to reach for from a considerable distance. "We're on the same team," she said. That's how teams work. She walked away before he could figure out how to respond to that. It was on day 9 that she discovered what Grant was actually running from. She didn't mean to. It happened during the unstructured 40-minute rest window that the program occasionally inserted into the schedule, not out of mercy, but because sleep deprivation research had established that short recovery windows actually increased the productivity of subsequent performance windows. So the rest periods were as strategic as everything else. Most candidates slept immediately, with the practiced efficiency of people who had learned to lose consciousness in under 2 minutes regardless of surface or noise level. Mara couldn't sleep. Her shoulder was producing the deep, grinding ache that meant she'd pushed it hard enough that it was going to demand acknowledgement. And she was sitting with her back against the staging area wall, doing the specific isometric exercises her physical therapist had prescribed for the joint, when she heard Grant's voice from around the corner. He was on a brief authorized call, personal. The program allowed 3 minutes every few days, not enough to maintain relationships, barely enough to maintain the idea of them, she heard him say, quietly and with an effort at steadiness that wasn't fully succeeding. I'm still here, Dad, I know what you said. A pause. It's not like that. It's no, I'm not. It's harder than I thought it would be. Another pause. Longer. I'm not quitting. I'm not going to quit. I needed to hear your voice. The silence after that was the kind that means the other person said something that landed somewhere vulnerable. I know, Grant said. I know what you sacrificed for this. I know. His voice had changed, stripped of its performance. Stripped of the manufactured certainty, I'll make it. I will, I just needed to hear your voice. Mara stopped doing the isometric exercises. She sat very still. She was hearing something she hadn't been meant to hear. Something that dismantled the entire simple structure she'd built around Grant Rourke, the arrogant obstructionist. The obstacle. The man who had made her first week harder than it needed to be because his ego couldn't accommodate her presence. She was hearing a son, trying to be what his father needed him to be. Carrying a weight that had nothing to do with the log or the boat or the surf passage. She stood up quietly, walked in the opposite direction, and did not let herself think about what she'd heard, not because she was going to use it against him, but because using it against him had never occurred to her, and sitting with the knowledge of it felt like holding something fragile that belonged to someone else. She put it away, and she spent the remaining 18 minutes of the rest window going over the tide charts for the coastal navigation assessment that was coming. Day 10 was the physical peak before what the candidates didn't yet know was coming. The evolutions that day pushed into territory that the program's published schedule had described vaguely as advanced integrated team assessments, which translated in practice to a series of overlapping challenges that tested boat handling, navigation, physical endurance, and crew decision-making simultaneously under conditions that were deliberately designed to produce information overload. Boat Crew 4 had found something in the previous days that none of them had planned for, and none of them would have described accurately if asked: a functional rhythm. Not trust, exactly. Not yet. But the particular working relationship that develops between people who have tested each other's limits and survived the experience without either side being destroyed by it. Grant called the evolution sharply and competently. He had absorbed the navigation lesson without ever directly acknowledging that he'd absorbed it, which was a form of learning that Mara recognized and accepted without requiring the acknowledgement to accompany it. Mara read the water at every transition point and reported what she found to the crew leader, not to demonstrate expertise but because it was useful information, and useful information existed to be shared. Eli managed the crew's medical status with a quiet thoroughness that meant nobody's small injury became a large one. Pacheco carried more than his physical share without complaint, which freed up capacity in the rest of the crew. Dillard, whose hands had healed cleanly, had become the best line handler in the crew. They were not the fastest crew in the class, but they were the most complete, and completeness in a program designed to simulate the actual operating conditions of special warfare teams was starting to show up in the evaluations in ways that pure speed and strength didn't account for. Senior Chief Dawson noticed. Strickland noticed. The candidates themselves noticed, though most of them didn't have the vocabulary for it yet. What was happening to Boat Crew 4 was not friendship. It was something harder and more functional than friendship, the specific solidarity that forms between people who have agreed, without ever saying so directly, that the mission is more important than their individual discomfort, including the discomfort of having been wrong about each other. On the evening of Day 10, during a 30-minute meal break that felt almost civilized by comparison to what had preceded it, Grant sat down across from Mara for the first time since training began. He didn't say anything immediately. He ate. She ate. The silence between them was different from the silences that had preceded it, less charged. More like the natural quiet between people who had run out of reasons to perform hostility at each other. Finally he said, "The surf entry technique you showed. The timing with the receding wave. What about it? I've been practicing it during the free movement windows. It's cutting about 30% off my energy expenditure in the impact zone." Good, he ate another bite. Where else does that principle apply? The working with the movement thing, instead of against it. She looked at him. He was asking a genuine question, not angling for something, not setting her up, just asking the way a person asks when they've decided that getting the answer matters more than protecting the image of not having needed to ask. "Almost everywhere," she said, "especially in situations where the force opposing you is larger than anything you can overcome directly. You can't beat the ocean, you can only find the parts of it that are already moving in a useful direction." He absorbed that. "That's not just about water." "No," she said, "it's not." He was quiet for a moment. "You've been doing that with me." It wasn't a question. She held his gaze. "I've been doing what works," she said. He nodded slowly. Something in his face settled, not into ease exactly, but into a kind of honest discomfort that was far more real than the aggressive certainty that had been there before. "I owe you a harder conversation than this," he said. "About the first few days." "You owe me getting through this program," she said. "That's what I actually need from you." He looked at her. "That's it?" "That, and calling the right heading when I give you the correct information." Something moved across his face that was almost a smile. "I'll work on it," he said. He went back to eating. She went back to eating. 12 feet away, Eli watched this exchange over the rim of his water bottle with the expression of a man witnessing something he'd predicted and was still finding more complicated than anticipated. Pacheco leaned over and said very quietly, "How long did you give that before it happened?" "Day 8, Eli said. "I was off by 2 days. She moved faster than you thought." "She always does," Eli said. "That's the whole point." And outside, somewhere past the perimeter of the base, the Pacific storm that had been forming at the edges of things for the last 3 days was no longer forming. It had formed, it was moving, and the forecast, which the candidates didn't have access to but the instructors did, were using language that made the senior staff look at the final coastal navigation assessment with fresh eyes and make no changes to it. Some courses teach by creating controlled difficulty. The best ones let reality provide the difficulty, and reality, in the form of 40-knot winds and a heavy Pacific swell, was less than 72 hours away. None of them knew it yet. But Mara had felt it in the water all day. The way the current ran differently when something large was coming. The way the sea changed its rhythm before it changed its face. She lay down that night in the brief window before lights out, stared at the ceiling and let herself feel afraid. Not of the storm, not of the training, of the specific, high-stakes, irreversible nature of moments that announce themselves only after they've already arrived. Aaron had taught her that. She closed her eyes and let the lesson sit where it needed to sit. Tomorrow, the course would take everything it had left. She needed to be ready for something worse than that. The storm briefing came at 1400 on day 11, and it was not the kind of briefing that contained reassurance. Senior Chief Dawson stood in front of the remaining 24 candidates with a weather printout that he didn't bother to pass around, because the relevant information was short enough to deliver verbally and direct enough not to require softening. Wind speeds were projected at 35 to 42 knots by midnight. Swell height at the assessment zone was running 8 to 11 feet, with a secondary swell train crossing from the northwest that would create the specific chaotic chop that formed when two wave systems collided, unpredictable, punishing the kind of water that made experienced sailors cautious and inexperienced ones dangerous. "The final coastal navigation assessment," Dawson said, "is not being modified." Nobody in the room spoke, but the room changed temperature by about 3 degrees in the collective intake of breath that followed that sentence. "You will launch at 2100. You will complete the route, recover the simulated intelligence packages from all 3 checkpoint markers, and return to the staging beach no later than 230. The storm will be at partial strength during your operational window." That is not a training variable we introduced. That is the Pacific Ocean behaving like the Pacific Ocean. He looked at them with the flat, honest directness of a man who respected them enough not to pretend. Which means tonight is exactly the kind of night this program is designed to prepare you for. Questions. No one had questions, or rather everyone had questions, and every one of them understood that the answers were going to be provided by the water rather than by Dawson. Mara spent the 2 hours before launch going over the tide charts she had already memorized and cross-referencing them against the storm track data that Eli had obtained through channels she chose not to examine too closely. The crossing swell was going to do something specific to the current in the southern channel, the narrow stretch of rocky coastline that the route's final leg required them to pass through. She had identified this 3 days earlier, during the navigation exercise where Grant had held the wrong heading. She had been thinking about it since then, the way she thought about all bodies of water that had the capacity to kill people, carefully, repeatedly, from multiple angles. The southern channel was the problem. In normal conditions, it was manageable with correct timing and crew coordination. Tonight's conditions, with the crossing swell adding a lateral force component to the already accelerated tidal current, it was going to be the kind of water that punished the unprepared with a specificity that felt almost personal. She went to Grant at 1830. He was running equipment checks on their IBS with the focused efficiency he'd been bringing to everything since their conversation at dinner 2 nights earlier, still not transformed. Still recognizably himself, but operating with a slightly wider aperture, as if he'd adjusted something in his internal field of view. "I need to talk to you about the southern channel," she said. He looked up. "Go." The crossing swell from the northwest is going to interact with the tidal current in a way that makes the standard route timing wrong. The window that the chart shows as viable is going to close about 18 minutes earlier than planned. If we're not through the channel entrance by 45 at the latest, we're going to be fighting a lateral push that's going to drive us into the rocks on the eastern wall. Grant was quiet for a moment. He was looking at her the way he'd been learning to look at her, not with skepticism exactly, but with the careful attention of a man who had been wrong about information from this source once already, and was doing his arithmetic differently now. "How confident are you?" he said. "Confident enough to tell you and not just write it in my personal log and hope I'm wrong." He nodded slowly. "Okay, what's the adjustment? We accelerate the middle leg. Cut the time at checkpoint 2 from 8 minutes to 4. Hit the channel entrance before 40 to give ourselves a margin. Checkpoint 2 recovery takes 6 minutes minimum. It takes 6 minutes if we split the recovery the standard way. If I handle the package extraction while you and Pacheco manage boat position, we can do it in 4. He thought about it. He was doing the crew math, who needed to do what, whether the pieces fit together the way she was describing, whether the risk of rushing checkpoint 2 was greater or smaller than the risk she was forecasting in the channel. "You'd have to go in the water at checkpoint 2, he said. "Alone at night. In this I've been in worse at night," she said. Alone. Something moved in his face. He knew about Aaron. Not from her, she hadn't told anyone beyond Strickland, but in a class of 24 people with limited privacy, and a corpsman who paid careful attention to everything, certain information moved without anyone deliberately carrying it. "Ellison, I'm not asking for your concern," she said, not unkindly. "I'm asking for your decision. Do we adjust the plan? Or do we run the standard route and take our chances in the channel?" Grant was quiet for a full 10 seconds. Mara counted them. "We adjust," he said. "Run it past Eli and Pacheco so the crew understands the timing change. I don't want anyone surprised in the water tonight." "Already planning to," she said. She turned to go. He said, "Ellison," she stopped. "If the channel gets bad," he said carefully, "you tell me. You don't manage it alone, and you don't disappear into problem-solving mode without keeping me in the picture." "Understood," she held his gaze. "Understood," she said. It was the right thing for a crew leader to say. She filed that too. They launched at 2,100 into water that was already running harder than the afternoon briefing had projected. The storm was ahead of its own schedule, which was something storms did when they were serious about their intentions. The wind had been building since 1,700, and by launch time it was running consistently at 28 knots with gusts that hit 35 and made the IBS feel, during the worst of them, like something a large and indifferent hand was trying to flip. The rain hadn't started yet, but the air had the specific weight of air that was holding rain in it temporarily, the way a person holds a breath before something difficult. Boat Crew 4 moved well in the first leg. Grant called the strokes with a rhythm that accounted for the cross-chop rather than fighting it. He'd absorbed the working with the water principle and was applying it in real time, which Mara noted without commenting on, because commenting on it would have made it a lesson, and it needed to be a habit. Pacheco and Dillard matched his rhythm. Eli managed the navigation calls from the bow position, checking their bearing against the shore reference points every 3 minutes. Mara read the water continuously. She read it the way she had read water for 3 years of EOD work, not just the surface, but the information the surface carried about what was happening below it. The wave period was shortening, which meant the crossing swell was arriving earlier than even her revised estimate. The channel window was going to be tighter than she'd told Grant. Maybe by another 10 minutes. She made the arithmetic quickly and didn't like the result. "Rourke," she said. "I see it," he said, without her having to specify what she meant. He'd been watching the same water. We pushed checkpoint 1. Move. They hit checkpoint 1 at 2,217. Recovered the package in 2 minutes 40 seconds, and were back on the water before the other 2 boat crews had finished their own recoveries. Mara watched the other crews from the waterline. As they launched, they were running standard timing, which meant they were going to arrive at the channel with whatever they were going to find there, and she felt the particular worry of someone who sees a problem developing that she has no authority to intervene in. That wasn't her call. Those were different crews with different crew leaders. In a competitive assessment, she focused on her own boat. The second leg ran longer than the first, a wider arc that took them further offshore before angling back toward checkpoint 2. The crossing swell hit them fully in the offshore section, and for approximately 8 minutes, Boat Crew 4 worked in conditions that had no comfortable description. The IBS was not in danger of sinking. It was designed for conditions far beyond what tonight was producing, but it was being handled in a way that demanded total concentration from every person in it, and total concentration under those physical conditions while simultaneously managing navigation, timing, and the building awareness that the channel window was narrowing, was the specific combination that the program had been building toward all along. Nobody rang a bell in the middle of the ocean, but 2 people in other crews came extremely close, and the instructors in the safety craft running parallel to the assessment knew it. Checkpoint 2 arrived at 2,304, 4 minutes early. Exactly what they'd needed, Ellison Grant said. Package recovery. Go. She went over the side. Fall water temperature hit her like a decision immediate. Total, the kind of cold that clarified everything and left no room for anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. She oriented on the checkpoint marker, which was a buoy and cord canister running about 6 feet below the surface. And dove. The crossing swell made the underwater approach chaotic in a way that surface swimming wasn't. The water moved laterally as well as vertically, and she had to correct her approach angle twice before she got her hands on the canister housing. The extraction mechanism required a specific sequence: release the retention pin, rotate the housing cap 90 degrees, withdraw the package insert, reseal. She had run the sequence in her head 50 times since the briefing. Her hands did it in darkness and cold and moving water in 41 seconds. She surfaced with the package, passed it to Dillard's waiting hands. Grant pulled her back over the gunwale with a grip that said he'd been watching the water the entire time she was under it. Good, he said. Good, she said. Move. We have maybe 20 minutes on the channel window. They moved. The channel entrance was visible at 38. 7 minutes of margin. Enough if everything went correctly. Not enough if anything didn't. Mar was watching a water in the channel entrance and feeling the thing she'd been calculating for 3 days announce itself in real time: the lateral push from the crossing swell, hitting the tidal current at the channel mouth and creating a surface pattern that looked, to the untrained eye, like choppier than usual conditions, and looked to her like a bowling ball rolling towards something breakable. Grant, she said, left of the channel center line. We want the eastern current shadow. It's slower water. How far left? Enough that the rocks on the west wall give us coverage from the lateral push. Maybe 10 meters, that's close to the rocks. The rocks don't move. The current does. He made the call in 2 seconds. Left 10 meters. Adjust your stroke rate. Dillard, watch the west wall clearance and call it if we're in. Said 5 meters. On it, Dillard said. They entered the channel. For the first 4 minutes, it worked. The eastern current shadow was exactly where Mara had said it would be: slower, more predictable, giving the crew a line through the channel that felt almost manageable given everything the night had been. Then the second swell train arrived. It was larger than the forecast had indicated. Significantly larger. It hit the channel mouth from the northwest at an angle that the chart's model hadn't fully accounted for, and it did what large water does when it enters a confined space: it compressed, accelerated, and turned sideways. The lateral push that Mara had been managing went from calculated risk to immediate danger in approximately 4 seconds. The wave that caught the stern of their IBS was not the largest wave of the evening, but it hit at the precise angle and the precise moment to rotate the boat 40 degrees off their heading, which put their starboard side broadside to the following sea, which produced the outcome that every person in the boat felt before they consciously understood it. The IBS went over. It happened fast and total, and without the courtesy of a warning that would have allowed preparation. One moment they were in the boat. The next moment the boat was above them and the channel was around them, and the sound of the water in the confined space was something that had weight to it, pressing in from every direction. Mara surfaced, counted heads immediately. That was the first action, before anything else, before self-assessment, before orientation, before anything. Count the heads. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 was wrong. There were 6 people in this boat. She turned. Pacheco was there, 8 meters to her left, already moving toward the overturned hull. Dillard was there, closer, grabbing for a handle on the IBS, there. Further right, treading water, looking around the way she was looking. 5 heads, 1 missing. Eli Grant's voice cut across the water noise. Nothing. Mara dove. She didn't think it through. The calculation happened below the level of thought. Eli was the missing head. Eli had been in the bow. The bow was the first part of the boat to take the wave impact when the IBS rotated, which meant if something had happened to Eli, it had happened on the starboard side near the bow, which was currently the downriver side of the overturned hull. She went under the boat, the space under an overturned IBS in a channel at night, and crossing swell is one of the most disorienting environments a human body can occupy. The hull above redirected sound. The current moved from multiple directions simultaneously. There was no visual reference. She moved by feel and by the three-dimensional spatial awareness that EOD dive work had built into her hands over years, the ability to understand her position relative to objects she couldn't see by reading the water pressure against her body. She found him in 11 seconds. Eli had been struck by the boat frame when the IBS inverted. The aluminum crossbar that ran across the bow had caught him across the left shoulder and upper chest and driven him down, and the same current that had flipped the boat had pushed him under the partially submerged section of the hull, where the trapped air pocket and the water turbulence had created a surface that was partly water and partly foam, and wasn't supporting him the way water was supposed to support a person. He was moving, barely. His hands were working but not efficiently. The blow had taken something from him, or the cold had, or both together. Mara got her arm across his chest from behind the survival carry, the position that kept his airway above water, and freed her hands for swimming, and immediately felt the wrong angle of his left shoulder under her arm. Something was displaced. She adjusted her grip to avoid the injury site and finessed the stabilization with one arm instead of two, which cost her mobility but protected him. She needed to get him out from under the hull. The trapped air pocket was shrinking as the boat moved with the current, and the gap between the hull and the water surface was closing on the downriver side. She could feel the safety line. It was attached to her harness, standard practice for channel work, and it ran back toward the channel entrance where the safety observer was stationed. She pulled on it twice, the signal for assistance needed, and felt the line go taut immediately, which meant the observer had the other end and was already reading the situation. The line held for 4 seconds, then it snagged. She felt it stop, not the gradual resistance of someone pulling against current, but the abrupt total stop of a line caught around a fixed object, a rock on the channel floor or the boat frame itself, or something else that didn't move regardless of what was attached to it. She had one arm holding Eli, the other arm needed to free the line. She could not do both with the control that the situation required. She chose Eli. She released the line. The full current hit her immediately, the push that the line had been partially neutralizing, now expressing itself completely against 2 people instead of 1. She felt it try to rotate them toward the channel wall. She countered with her legs, working against the lateral force, buying herself the seconds she needed to think Eli. She said it directly into his ear because the water noise made anything quieter useless. "I need you to work with me. Can you kick?" A pause that lasted long enough to frighten her. Then his voice was wrong, thin, air-starved, the voice of someone who had taken a blow to the chest and hadn't fully recovered the mechanics of breathing. But it was there. "Kick," she said, "not hard, just steady. Match my rhythm." She felt him begin to move, imprecise, but present. Working. She oriented on the gap between the hull edge and the open water, the downstream exit from under the boat, where the current would work with them instead of across them if she could get the angle right. She calculated the wave cycle timing from the swell pattern she could feel through the water. 3rd cycle. She needed the 3rd cycle, when the lateral push would be at its minimum between the crossing swells. She counted 1 cycle, 2. On the 3rd she drove them forward. They cleared the hull edge into open water, and the current immediately took them downriver, which was controlled. Controlled was survivable. Controlled was workable, and she went back to the head count instinct. 2 people moving. Airway above surf, breathing. She heard Grant before she saw him, Ellison, southwest. "I have a line." He was in the water. He had gone in not from the safety craft, not from the channel wall. He had gone into the channel after her, with a line he'd taken from the IBS, because whatever calculation he'd run had produced the answer that the line observer wasn't reaching them fast enough and something needed to happen sooner. She got her hand on the line. Grant pulled. She pulled with him, one-armed, keeping Eli against her with the other. Dillard and Pacheco were on the channel bank. She could hear them, their voices cutting through the water noise, calling distance and position. 12 meters, 8.5. Her feet found something solid, not the bottom too shallow for that here. A submerged shelf of rock. but stable, enough to push from. She transferred a weight to Grant's hands and pushed, and the three of them came up the channel bank with the specific exhausted, total effort of people who have used everything they had. Eli made a sound when they got him horizontal on the bank that was the worst sound Mara had heard since Aaron. Not a scream, something smaller and more honest than a scream. The sound of a body reporting damage. She was on her knees beside him before he stopped making it. Left shoulder, she said to Grant, who had dropped to the other side. Possible clavicle fracture or AC separation from the crossbar impact. Watch the breathing, he took it in the chest too. We need to check for pneumothorax. You're doing triage right now, Grant said. Not a question, just acknowledgement. Someone has to, she said. Talk to him. Keep him responsive. Tell me if his speech changes, Eli. Grant put his hand on Eli's right shoulder, the good one. Eli, look at me, you're out of the water, you're on the bank. Look at me. Eli looked at him, his eyes were tracking. That, he said, and paused to manage the mechanics of breathing around something that clearly hurt. Was not in the briefing. No, Grant said, and his voice was not steady. No, it was not, Mara, Eli said. Right here, she said from the other side. Your shoulder, he said. Your left shoulder. Tell me the truth. She had not thought about her shoulder since she went into the water. She thought about it now. It was reporting something from a considerable distance, the way pain sometimes did when adrenaline was managing the volume. She moved the joint carefully, ran the basic assessment that her physical therapist had taught her to self-administer. Something was wrong. Not catastrophically, but structurally wrong, the kind of wrong that had a name and a recovery timeline and a surgical consultation attached to it. It's not ideal, she said. That's a yes, he said. Focus on your breathing, she told him. I'm a corpsman, he said, and almost managed to make it sound like he wasn't hurting. I can do two things. The safety craft arrived 40 seconds later. The channel observer had been fighting the current at the entrances and hadn't been able to enter the restricted space without risking collision with the walls, a choice that was correct and that had cost them the line, and that everyone on that bank understood without needing to say it. The lead instructor on the safety craft was not Dawson. It was Strickland. He came up the bank at a pace that said he had processed the situation from the water and was now in action mode rather than assessment mode. He looked at Eli first, his eyes doing the rapid clinical inventory of a man who had seen field casualties, and then at Mara. Ellison. Navarro took a crossbar impact to the left shoulder and chest on capsizing, she said. Flat and fast, the way she'd been trained to deliver medical information. Possible clavicle fracture or AC joint injury, need imaging to confirm. Chest impact, no signs of tension, pneumothorax currently. Breathing is labored but bilaterally present. He needs a facility, and you? Left shoulder. I'll need evaluation. Can you walk? Yes, then walk. He turned to the crew. The other two crews, where are they? Nobody knew. The chaos of the capsize had consumed everything else, and the water noise and the rain that had finally started falling made tracking other boats impossible. Strickland made a call on his radio, short, direct, the language of someone accustomed to situations where brevity was medical. He listened to the response, and something in his expression changed in a way that Mara caught and catalogued. The other crews hit the channel, he said, not to anyone specifically, but to the group as a whole they're managing. He looked at Mara. The second crew went in on the western approach. 2 candidates are in the water. The third crew pulled back. She absorbed this. The western approach is the worst line in these conditions. Yes, Strickland said. They need to come out on the eastern bank, not the western. The western wall. I know what the western wall does in a crossing swell. Ellison. He looked at her. We have people on it. He paused. Right now, I need you to tell me whether Navarro can be moved safely. She looked at Eli. She had done the manual assessment. The shoulder injury was isolated enough. The chest impact wasn't producing the signs of serious internal compromise. Moving him correctly was safer than leaving him in the rain on a rock shelf. Yes, she said. Stabilize the left side. Don't let the shoulder rotate. Keep him sitting up slightly. For the breathing, don't lay him flat. Understood. Strickland turned and delivered those exact instructions to the safety crew in the craft. Then he turned back to Mara and did something she hadn't expected. He said quietly, so only she could hear, "You went under the boat for him." It wasn't a question. He was under there, she said. The safety line snagged, yes. And you released it. I couldn't free the line and hold him at the same time. Strickland looked at her for a long moment. In the rain, on a rock shelf, with the channel noise and the storm and Eli being moved carefully toward the safety craft 20 feet away. How long were you under that boat, Ellison? She thought about it honestly. I'm not sure. 45 seconds. Maybe a minute, in a channel. At night. In crossing swell. With a compromised shoulder, she didn't answer, because the facts he was reciting were their own answer. Were you afraid? He asked. The whole time, she said. He held her gaze. and Eli needed to come up, so I stayed down until he could. Strickland looked at her for 3 more seconds. Then he said, "Get to the craft, Ellison, we're pulling this assessment." She moved toward the safety craft. Behind her, she heard Grant fall into step alongside her. He didn't say anything for the first several paces. "Then I should have listened to you about the channel." "You did listen," she said. "We adjusted the plan, we got through the window, we still capsized. The swell was larger than the forecast." "That's not a navigation error, Rourke. That's the ocean." He was quiet for a moment. "I went in after you. I know, I didn't think it through. I just went." "That's what you do when someone's under a boat," she said simply. "You go." He absorbed that. They reached the craft and he helped her over the gunwale with the unself-conscious care of someone who had stopped performing and was just being present, and she accepted it with the same simplicity. Eli was seated against the starboard side, breathing carefully, his right hand pressed against his collarbone in the instinctive, self-splinting gesture of someone managing a structural injury. When he saw Mara, something in his face released slightly. "You let go of the line," he said. "I had better things to hold," she said, and sat down next to him. He didn't answer that, but he let his right shoulder lean, just slightly, against her left one, careful, controlled. The touch of someone who knew about the injury and was choosing contact anyway, because contact was what the moment needed. She let him. The safety craft moved toward the staging beach. The rain was full now, and the Pacific was doing exactly what it had announced it would do, and the storm didn't care what had happened in the channel, or what had been risked, or what had been kept. It just kept moving, the way serious things do. Strickland sat at the front of the craft and did not look at any of them, which was how Mara knew he was thinking rather than observing. He was holding something in his mind that hadn't been fully assembled yet. She could feel it, the way she felt water by the pressure it generated. She didn't know yet what it was going to become. She knew only that tonight had ended something, and that whatever came next was going to be different in ways that none of them had names for yet. Dillard was sitting across from her. He looked hollowed out, the specific emotional depletion that follows a crisis that resolves correctly but that didn't have to. He met her eyes. "You came back up," he said. "I always come back up," she said. He nodded slowly. "I know that now," he said. "I think I knew it before. I just didn't have the evidence." She looked at him. "Now you do," she said. The staging beach appeared through the rain. The lights were on and figures were moving, and the particular organized urgency of medical personnel arriving at a situation that wasn't finished yet was already in motion. Eli would be okay. She was certain of that in the way she was certain of tides, not hope. Not optimism, but reading and calculation and the knowledge that certain things, when you understand them well enough, become predictable. Her shoulder was going to be a different conversation. She didn't let herself think about that yet. She let herself be on the boat, in the rain, with the people she'd gone into the water with, and she let that be enough for the moment. The craft touched the beach. Everything that came next was going to be harder in ways she hadn't prepared for. The medical facility at Coronado didn't sleep, and neither did the people waiting in it. Eli went into imaging first. Mara sat in the corridor outside with her left arm held against her body in the position that hurt least, which wasn't a comfortable position, but was the only one available. And she listened to the building sounds around her, the specific vocabulary of a medical space processing multiple patients simultaneously, efficiently, without drama. Doors, wheels, voices at the controlled volume of people who had learned to communicate urgency without escalating the room. Grant sat down beside her at 340 without asking if the seat was available. She didn't tell him to move. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The corridor had the particular quality of spaces where serious things had recently happened, a residual weight in the air, the way a room holds the shape of an argument even after the argument ends. "Pacheco's shoulder is bruised but intact," Grant said finally. "Dillard's fine. 2 lacerations on his right forearm from the hull contact, nothing that needs more than closure." "Good," she said. "The second crew, both candidates, are out of the water. One has a mild concussion, the other one is being evaluated for hypothermia, and the third crew pulled back before the channel. They hit the channel mouth, read the conditions, and made the call to abort the leg." He paused. Strickland said it was the correct tactical decision given the information they had. Mara absorbed this. "It was," she said. "With what they knew and where they were, pulling back was right. Would you have pulled back?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said, "but I had information they didn't, and I had Eli in the water." Grant nodded. His hands were between his knees, and he was looking at the floor with the particular attention of a man whose mind was somewhere more complicated than a corridor. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You told me that was coming, I know. I'm saying it now." He looked up, not for the channel. For before the channel, for the first week, for all of it, he stopped. Started again differently. I came into this program completely certain I understood what it required and who could provide it. I had a model. And you didn't fit the model. And instead of questioning the model, I questioned you." She looked at him. "I know, that's it? You know? What do you want me to say, Rourke? I don't know." "Something. I was angry," she said. Past tense. "It's expensive and I needed the energy for other things." She held his gaze. "What you did in the water tonight, that wasn't the man who threw my name around on day 3. That was someone different." "I'm not sure those are different people," he said quietly. "I think they're the same person. One of them just hadn't been put somewhere he couldn't manage with certainty yet." That stopped her. She studied him. "That's a hard thing to say about yourself." "It's a harder thing to not say," he said. After tonight she let that sit. "The apologies accepted," she said. "Not because the damage didn't happen. Because what you did after it matters too." He was quiet. "Then, is that how you think about everything, what someone does after?" "It's how I think about the things that count," she said. "Before is easy. Anyone can perform before. After is when you find out what a person actually is." The door to the imaging room opened and a technician appeared, nodded at Mara, and said they were ready for her. She stood, and the shoulder reminded her immediately and specifically of everything it had absorbed in the last 4 hours. Grant stood with her. "Ellison," she stopped. "You're going to come back from this," he said. The shoulder. "Whatever they say tonight, you're going to come back." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. She went through the door. The imaging results arrived at 520, delivered by a Navy orthopedic surgeon named Commander Patricia Wace, who had the direct, unhurried manner of someone who understood that the quality of the information mattered more than the comfort of its delivery. "Torn labrum," she said. "Posterior. You've got some additional fraying around the supraspinatus that suggests this injury predates tonight. Probably a progressive stress pattern from the previous shoulder surgery." Mara was sitting on the examination table with the particular stillness of someone who is managing their response before it reaches their face. "What's the timeline for return to full physical activity?" Wiz looked at her chart. "Conservative estimate, 6 months. Aggressive rehabilitation. You could potentially compress that to 5. But I would need you to understand that aggressive, it means doing everything correctly. Every day without negotiation." "In the course?" Mara asked. "Medical continuation. We set down the chart. That's not my determination to make. That's the training commands. What I can tell you is that the injury is repairable. The prognosis for full recovery is good, and the mechanism of injury tonight, the circumstances under which you sustained it, is documented in detail." "Meaning?" "Meaning whoever reviews your case will have the complete picture." She paused. "Including what you were doing when it happened." Mara held her gaze. "You know what I was doing?" "Yes," we said simply. "I do." She left Mara with an ice pack, immobilized, and a prescription for anti-inflammatories that Mara looked at and then set aside because she needed her head clear for whatever came next. What came next arrived at 730 in the form of Master Chief Strickland, who knocked on the examination room door with the particular courtesy of a man who understood he was entering someone else's difficult morning. He sat down across from her. He had changed out of his wet gear, which was the only indication that significant time had passed since the channel. "Navarro," he said first. "Tell me, clavicle fracture?" "Undisplaced. No pneumothorax. The chest pain was bruised rib. He's going to need 6 to 8 weeks before he's physical again. But he's intact." Strickland held her gaze. "Because of what you did under that boat." She didn't answer that. "The investigation into last night's assessment is beginning this morning," he said. "Standard protocol for any training event that results in injury. You'll be interviewed. So will every other member of Boat Crew 4, the safety observers, and the crew leaders from the other 2 boats." "I understand. I'm going to tell you something before that process begins," he said. "Because I want you to walk into it with full information." He leaned forward slightly. "The preliminary read from me, from Dawson, from the safety observer who was at the channel entrance, is that what happened last night was a function of storm conditions that exceeded forecast parameters. Not a navigation error, not a crew failure. Grant held the right line into the channel," she said immediately. "He made the correct call based on the adjusted plan." Strickland looked at her. "You're defending him. I'm giving you accurate information. He held the standard route on day 7 and missed the checkpoint. He adjusted his approach after that. Last night he executed the modified plan correctly. The wave that took us was outside the forecast envelope. That's not on him." Strickland was quiet for a moment. "You know that how the board assesses his performance in that channel is going to affect whether he continues in the program." "I know," she said. "And you're still telling me he made the right calls." "I'm telling you what happened," she said. Steady and direct. "What the board does with accurate information is their job. My job is to give it to them accurately. He studied her for a long time. You could make this easier for yourself, he said carefully. If the board finds that crew leadership contributed to the capsize, that shifts accountability away from you and toward Rourke. Your injury, the assessment outcome, all of that lands differently. I know exactly how it lands differently, she said. And I'm still telling you he made the right calls. Strickland sat back. Something in his face was doing the complicated work of a man revising a category he'd been using incorrectly. Why, he asked. A genuine question. Mara looked at him. Because he did, she said. And because I want to serve with people who tell the truth about what happened even when a different version would be more convenient. The only way I get that is if I'm that person first. The silence that followed was the kind that meant something had landed and needed a moment before the next thing could begin. Strickland stood. The review board convenes at 1300, he said. Your interview is at 1400. I'll be there, she said. At the door he stopped. He didn't turn around. For what it's worth, he said. When you went under that boat, what you did, how you managed it, how you brought him up, that was the most complete piece of water work I've seen from a candidate in 11 years of running this course. He paused. I wanted you to know that I saw it. He left. Mara sat in the examination room alone for 3 minutes and let herself feel what those words did to her. Not pride exactly. Something closer to the particular relief of being accurately seen by someone whose assessment you respected. Then she picked up the ice pack, repositioned it on her shoulder, and started organizing what she was going to say to the review board. The review board convened in a conference room that smelled like institutional coffee and contained 4 people whose collective experience with naval special warfare exceeded a century. Strickland, Dawson, a medical officer, and a captain named Hargrove, who served as the board's presiding authority. Hargrove was 61 years old, had the measured, unreadable presence of someone who had sat in chairs like this one many times and understood that the chair's job was to listen before it decided anything. Grant went in at 1300. Mara sat outside and did not allow herself to speculate about what was happening inside, because speculation without data was just fear wearing the costume of analysis. Eli, who had been discharged from the medical facility with his arm in a sling and instructions that he appeared to be treating as advisory rather than binding, appeared beside her at 1320 and sat down with the careful, one-sided lowering of a man managing a structural injury. You should be horizontal, she said. Probably, he agreed. What are you thinking about? The board. Specifically, whether Grant's going to tell them what actually happened or whether he's going to adjust the narrative in a way that protects himself. Eli was quiet for a moment. What do you think he's going to do? I think he's going to tell the truth, she said. I think it's going to cost him something, and I think he's going to do it anyway. Because of what happened in the water. Because of who he was in the water, she said. The channel didn't change him. It revealed him. The person who went in after us was already there. It just needed conditions that stripped everything else away. Eli leaned his head back against the wall. That's a generous read. It's an accurate read, she said. Generous would be pretending the first week didn't happen. I'm not doing that. But you're defending him to the board. I'm telling the board what happened, she said. The same words she'd used with Strickland, because they were the right words and repetition didn't make them less true. Those aren't the same thing. Eli looked at her sideways. You know what the difference between you and most people is. I'm sure you're going to tell me. Most people defend the version of events that serves them. You defend the version that's true and then trust truth to serve you. He paused. That's not common. It should be, she said. A lot of things should be, he said. Doesn't make them common. The conference room door opened at 1347. Grant came out. His face was composed in the careful way of someone who has just done something that cost something real and is still processing the transaction. He saw Mara. He stopped. I told them everything, he said. The Day 7 navigation, my call, my error. Last night the modified plan was my execution. The wave was outside the forecast. All of it. He held her gaze. I told them you warned me at Day 7 and I overrode you. And that last night you gave me the correct information and I used it correctly. She looked at him steadily. Okay, that's it? Okay, what else should I say? He exhaled. I don't know. I thought you'd be. I don't know what I thought. You told the truth, she said. That's what I needed from you. That's what I said in the channel. Something in his face shifted, not relief. Exactly. But the particular easing of a person who has done a hard thing and received neither punishment nor excessive reward for it. Just acknowledgement, which was all the hard thing had ever actually needed. They're going to review my Day 7 call, he said. There might be a formal notation. I know I might not graduate with this class. I know that too, she said. What did you tell them about it? I told them I'd accept whatever determination they made, he said, and that I understood why the notation was warranted. He paused. And I told them that whatever they decided about me, Ellison's decisions last night prevented multiple casualties and that I wanted that in the record. She was quiet for a moment. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, he said simply. That's the other thing I learned from you. You do the right thing. Because it's the right thing. Not because someone's watching, not because it benefits you. Just because it's what the situation requires. He, from his position against the wall, said nothing. But he was watching Grant with the expression of a man updating a significant file. Mara's name was called. She sat across from Hargrove and answered every question with the same precision she'd used with Strickland Complete. Unembellished, in the sequential order that events had actually occurred. She did not editorialize, she did not minimize, she did not position anything for effect. When Hargrove asked her directly whether Boat Crew 4's leadership had contributed to the capsize, she said the crew leader executed the modified navigation plan correctly. The capsize resulted from a swell event that exceeded the forecast envelope. No leadership error contributed to the capsize. When Hargrove asked about the Day 7 navigation exercise, she said, the crew leader received correct current data and made an independent call to maintain the original heading. The team missed the checkpoint. The crew leader acknowledged the error. She paused and adjusted his approach for every subsequent navigation evolution, including last night's assessment. Hargrove looked at her over the edge of his folder. You're aware that a more critical account of the crew leader's Day 7 performance would shift the accountability calculus for your own injury. Yes, she said. And you're choosing not to offer that account. I'm choosing to give you an accurate account, she said. If accurate happens to also be favorable to someone, that's not distortion, that's just what happened. Hargrove studied her. Ellison, your service record has a restriction on it. She had known this was coming. Yes. The board has requested that the restriction be reviewed in light of last night's events. Commander Weiss's medical report documented the mechanism of your injury in detail specifically. That you sustained the shoulder damage while performing an underwater rescue of a teammate in a confined channel, in storm conditions after releasing your safety line in order to maintain contact with the casualty. He set the folder down. The restriction was placed on your record 3 years ago. I've been authorized to tell you that Naval Special Warfare Command has reviewed the original incident that necessitated the restriction and has made a determination. She went very still. Chief Aaron Vale's death, Hargrove said quietly, has been fully investigated and formally closed as a training accident resulting from equipment failure. No operator error, no failure of duty. He held her gaze. That determination was made 14 months ago. The notification was delayed due to administrative failures in the routing process, which means you have been carrying a restriction on your record and everything that restriction implied to you about that day for 14 months longer than was ever necessary. The room was very quiet. Mara looked at her hands. She looked at them for a long time. 14 months, she said. I'm sorry, Hargrove said. And it was the specific apology of an institution, acknowledging that it had failed a person through process, rather than through intention, which was its own particular kind of inadequate. She breathed, in and out, carefully, the way she breathed underwater with the specific intentionality of someone who understood that breathing was a choice you made, not just a function that happened. The restriction on my record, she said finally. What happens to it? It's being lifted. The commendation associated with the original EOD operation, the mission that the restriction was protecting, is being formally entered into your service record. Hargrove's voice was steady and not unkind. The operation involved an underwater ordnance disablement in a contested environment with Allied personnel present. You remained submerged past the point of safe return on your primary air supply to complete the disablement. The Allied evacuation route was preserved. 37 personnel cleared the route in the 90 minutes following your disablement. She had not let herself think about that mission in a long time. She had not let herself think about anything in her record that carried the weight of recognition, because recognition had felt like something she hadn't earned while the restriction existed. I didn't tell anyone about it, she said. When I came here, I didn't tell anyone what was in the record we know, Hargrove said. That was noted by the reviewing officers as relevant. He paused. As was the fact that you specifically told Master Chief Strickland, during your underwater confidence evaluation, that you did not want past recognition to purchase present respect. She looked up. He reported that conversation in detail, Hargrove said. It formed part of the basis for the command's decision to request the restriction review. He leaned forward slightly. Ellison, you came to this program not to trade on what you'd done, but to find out whether fear still owned you. The board's determination is that the answer to that question was demonstrated clearly, and at considerable personal cost in the Southern Channel last night. The room was quiet again. But this quiet was different from the others, not heavy, not weighted with pending difficulty. This was the quiet of something that had been held under pressure for a very long time finally being allowed to be exactly what it was. She thought about Aaron. She thought about him the way she always thought about him, not the accident, not the failure, not the equipment O-ring, but the laugh that carried across buildings and the daughter who liked horses and the way he'd always said, before any dive without irony, come back up, just that. Come back up. Their shorthand for the whole complicated covenant of people who worked in places that could kill them. She had come back up every time, 14 months longer than necessary, carrying a weight that had already been formally lifted without her knowing it. What's the board's determination on my medical continuation, she said. Hargrove looked at Commander Weiss's report again. The recommendation is medical continuation. You will be permitted to return to assessment when medically cleared, and you will complete the remaining physical evolution under the same standards as every other candidate. He paused. There will be no accommodation for the shoulder history. The course doesn't adjust its standards, I know, she said. I never asked it to, I know you didn't, Hargrove said. And something in the way he said it made her understand that this was not a routine determination, that what had happened in this room and the previous hours had been observed and weighed by people who took the weight of it seriously. She stood, her shoulder ached. Her body was running on no sleep and too much adrenaline and the specific deep exhaustion that followed high-stress water work. She was a long way from the graduation ceremony, and a long way from healed. She had never felt more certain she would get there. Grant was waiting in the corridor. He looked up when she came out. Read her face the way he'd been learning to read water, for information, not for what he wanted to see. Medical continuation, he said. Yes, he exhaled. Good, then the board formal notation on day 7. They're reviewing whether it affects your continuation status. She looked at him. I told them what I told you I'd tell them, I know. Thank you, he said it simply without the effortful reach of the previous times. It came easier now. What else happened in there? She was quiet for a moment. Some things that were overdue, she said. He read her face again and understood that this was as much as she was offering, and he accepted it without pushing. For what it's worth, he said. Whatever they decide about my continuation, I'll accept it. And if I have to restart, I'll restart. I know you will, she said. He looked at her. How do you know that? Because in the channel, she said, you had a choice between managing your own safety and going in after us. You didn't even pause. She held his gaze. People who will do that will do the harder thing too. He was quiet. Then my father, he said carefully. She looked at him. This program part of why I came in the way I did. So certain. So the way I was is because he sacrificed a lot for me to be here. He wanted this, I wanted it too, but his want was it was structural. It held everything else up. Grant's voice was careful and honest and slightly raw at the edges. And when I heard you were in the class, part of what I felt was if you can do this, what does that say about what it means to him, what it means to me? She listened. That was wrong, he said. That was about my ego wearing my father's expectations as justification. He paused. What it actually said was that I'd been defining this wrong from the start, that I'd made it about exclusion instead of excellence. She looked at him for a long moment. Your father wanted you here because he thought you had what it takes, she said. Last night in that channel you had what it takes, so did you? We both did, she said. That's the point. Something settled in his face. Not the closure of a thing finished, but the opening of a thing correctly begun. Eli appeared from around the corner, moving carefully, his arm in the sling, looking like someone who had been told to rest and had interpreted this as permission to rest while walking. The board's final notification on Rourke, he said, because he was a corpsman, and he gathered information the way other people gathered breath. Medical officer confirmed. Formal notation notice. Continuation approved pending the next assessment window. Grant closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. Okay, Eli confirmed. He looked at Mara. And your restriction, she looked at him. Word travels, she said. Strickland told me, Eli said, because he thought you might need a friend nearby when you came out of that room. He paused. He was right. She looked at him, at his arm in the sling, at the careful way he was managing his breathing around the bruised ribs, at the completely Eli-ness of his being here in a corridor instead of horizontal in a medical bed because he had assessed that someone he cared about might need him. You should be in bed, she said. Probably, he agreed. How are you? She thought about it honestly. The shoulder ached. Her body was at the edge of its reserves. Her surface record was no longer what it had been this morning. Aaron's death was formally and finally what it had always actually been, not her failure. A mechanical failure, in a world where mechanical things failed sometimes, regardless of how correctly everyone did their jobs. I'm better than I've been in a long time, she said. Eli nodded. He looked at her with the quiet, careful attention that had seen her since day one, the look that didn't want anything from her, that just saw. "He'd have been proud of you," he said. "Vale, he'd have been proud of last night." She held very still. "You didn't know him?" "No," Eli said. "But I know the kind of person who trains a partner to go back in the water when they're afraid. And I know what that person would feel watching you choose Strickland's condition over the safety line." She looked away, looked back. "Come back up," she said quietly. "What? It's what we used to say." Before every dive, she paused. He always said it first. Eli was quiet for a moment. "Then come back up," he said simply. She breathed. "Yeah," she said. Grant, who had been standing slightly apart from this exchange with the sensitivity of a man who understood he was witnessing something that didn't require his commentary, said quietly, "What do we do now?" Mara looked at both of them. At the corridor. At the particular quality of a morning that had started in a storm channel and arrived here incomplete. "Painful, reconfigured, but intact. Now we recover," she said. "Correctly. All the way. Because the course doesn't care what happened last night. It's going to be exactly as hard as it's always been when we go back." "When we go back," Eli noted. Not if, she agreed." Grant nodded once. The nod of a man who had found his bearing after a long time navigating without one. Strickland appeared at the end of the corridor, not approaching. Just present, visible, in the particular way of someone who wanted to be seen without needing to be addressed. He looked at the three of them. He held Mara's gaze for a moment. Then he turned and walked away. She understood. The corridor and everything in it was a part of the record now. Not the official record Hargrove's board had that. The other kind. The kind that lived in the bodies and memories of people who had been in the water together and had all come back up. That record didn't need notation. It was already written. And when she finally got horizontal in the medical facility, with her shoulder immobilized and her eyes closed and the specific weighted exhaustion of a person who had spent everything they had and was now rebuilding from the foundation, she did not think about the pain, or the timeline, or the months of rehabilitation ahead. She thought about Aaron. And for the first time since the accident, the thought of him didn't arrive with guilt attached to it. It arrived the way good memories should arrive, with the person in them fully present. Fully himself, laughing the way he laughed, saying what he always said. Come back up, she had. She would again. The rehabilitation didn't care about what happened in the channel. That was the first thing Mara learned in the weeks following the assessment, that the body processed trauma on its own timeline, indifferent to narrative. Indifferent to what the review board had determined, or what Hargrove had said in that quiet conference room, or what Aaron's file now formally stated. The shoulder had been damaged. It needed to be rebuilt. And rebuilding it meant starting at the beginning, which meant starting at almost nothing, which meant that the woman who had gone under an overturned boat in a storm channel to bring a teammate back up was now struggling to lift her left arm above shoulder height without pain that made her vision go briefly white at the edges. She did it anyway, every day. Twice a day. Her physical therapist was a Navy civilian named Doris Chen, 54 years old, with hands that knew exactly where the damaged tissue was without being told, and the particular combination of precision and stubbornness that the best physical therapists share with the best EOD operators. She did not offer false encouragement. She did not say things would be fine before the evidence supported that conclusion. What she said on the first day was, "This is going to take everything you have. The people who recover fully from this injury are the people who treat rehabilitation like a mission. Not like recovery, like a mission." "I know how to run a mission," Mara said. "Then we understand each other," Doris said, and began. The first month was the hardest. Not because of the pain was information, and Mara had learned years ago to extract the useful content from pain without letting the volume of it overwhelm the signal. The hardest part was the stillness. The enforced removal from physical training while the class she had started with continued without her. She received updates through Eli, who had been medically separated from the current assessment cycle and was running his own parallel rehabilitation from the clavicle fracture. They talked every few days. Not long calls, they were both managing the particular conserved energy state of people in recovery who understood that everything spent was borrowed from healing. But enough. Grant made it through the third week, Eli told her in the fifth week of her rehabilitation. "I know. Strickland texted me." A pause. "Strickland texted you?" "He does that occasionally. Short messages, operational updates." She kept her voice neutral. "I think it's his version of checking in without admitting he's checking in. That is the most Strickland thing I've ever heard." Another pause. "How's the shoulder?" 60% range of motion. "Doris says I'm 2 weeks ahead of the conservative timeline." "Of course you are. Don't say of course like it's inevitable." "I'm working for every degree." "I know you are," he said. And meant it. "That's why it's of course." She ran the isometric exercises after she hung up. 3 sets, both sides. She had started doing the right side too, not because it needed rehabilitation, but because symmetry and recovery produced better functional outcomes, and because doing only the damaged side felt like conceding something she wasn't ready to concede. Grant called in the 6th week. It was late past 2100, which meant he was calling from whatever window existed between evening training and lights out, which meant he was spending sleep capital on this conversation, which meant it mattered to him enough to pay that price. I made it through Hell Week, he said. She had known this was coming from the Strickland updates, but hearing it directly from Grant carried different weight. Tell me, she said. It was. He stopped. She heard him breathe. I don't have adequate language for what it was. Nobody does. There was a moment, I think it was day 3. But time stops, meaning anything where I was in the water at 300 and everything I'd ever used to tell myself who I was had just stopped working, like a generator that runs out of fuel, and I was just there, in the water, with nothing left. What did you do? I thought about the channel, he said. I thought about what you said, that the ocean doesn't beat you. It just keeps asking the question until you stop answering. And I thought about the fact that you kept answering. Under the boat, with the safety line gone, with your shoulder already damaged, you kept answering. His voice was quiet and completely honest. I thought if you could keep answering that, I could keep answering this. She was quiet for a moment. You kept answering, she said. I kept answering. Then that's what matters. How long until you're back? He asked. Doris says I'm tracking for 4 months total. Maybe 3.5 if the next tissue evaluation comes back where I think it will. That puts you in the next assessment window. That's the plan. Same standards, he said. Wasn't a question. He knew her well enough now to know she wouldn't have it any other way, but it carried something in it that might have been admiration if Grant had been the kind of man who used that word easily. Same standards, she confirmed. I wouldn't come back any other way. He was quiet for a beat. Then, I want to be there. When you come back, I want to be there for the assessment. She thought about that. You'll be done by then, moving on to the next phase, I know, he said. I'll still be there. She didn't argue with him. Arguing with Grant Rourke when he decided something, she had learned, was like arguing with a tidal current. You could note its direction, but redirecting it required more energy than it was worth. Get some sleep, she said. You're spending recovery time on this call. Worth it, he said, and hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand for a moment, in the specific quiet of someone who has just received something uncomplicated and good, and who is still slightly surprised by the existence of uncomplicated good things. Then she did another set of isometric exercises and went to sleep. The 2nd month brought a twist she hadn't planned for. Strickland called her not a text this time, an actual call, which he almost never did on a Tuesday morning when she was between therapy sessions and had enough cognitive bandwidth to handle whatever was coming. The training command, he said, without preamble, because preamble was not a Strickland communication style, has been developing a new leadership assessment scenario. Based on the channel event, she went very still. Define developing. A structured evolution. Candidates are placed in a team situation where the person with the relevant expertise is not the designated crew leader. The evaluation is whether the crew leader can recognize and act on expertise from an unexpected source, and whether the expert can deliver critical information in a way that a resistant authority figure can actually receive. She understood immediately what he was describing. You're teaching both sides of the problem. We're trying to. The scenario needs a subject matter consultant, someone who can work with the curriculum designers to ensure the water reading elements are technically accurate, and that the psychological components, the resistance dynamics, the information delivery strategies reflect how it actually works, rather than how it looks in a classroom. You're asking me to help design it. I'm asking if you're interested in the conversation, he said. This would be in addition to your rehabilitation and your return to assessment. Not instead of. She thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. Yes, she said. I'll connect you with the curriculum team, he said. They'll reach out this week. A pause. Ellison. Yes, the scenario is going to be named, he said. Standard practice for leadership case studies used in training. The command has proposed naming it after the event. The Southern Channel Assessment. Another pause, shorter. And after Vale. The Aaron Vale leadership scenario. She didn't speak for a moment. His daughter, Mara, said finally. She'd be about 9 now. We reached out to the family through the proper channels, Strickland said carefully. His wife, his former wife, was informed of the commendation reinstatement and the formal case closure 14 months ago, when the determination was made. She was informed of this proposal last week. He paused. She said yes immediately. Mara closed her eyes. Opened them. Then yes, she said. Absolutely yes. Good, Strickland said. For the first time in the entire conversation, something in his voice shifted by a fraction, not softness exactly, but the particular register of a person who is doing something they believe matters and feels the weight of that belief. He would have been a good operator, he said. The best, she said. He was already the best. After she hung up, she went to her next therapy session and told Doris to add 10 minutes to the end of the session. Doris looked at her over the edge of her clipboard and said, "Something happened." "Something good," Mara said. "Good things are not an excuse to overtrain." 10 minutes, Mara said. Doris added 10 minutes and watched Mara work through them with the particular focused intensity of someone who had just been given something worth getting stronger for. 3.5 months after the channel, the tissue evaluation came back where she'd expected. Doris read the results with the careful neutrality of someone who knew that the person across from her was going to interpret any facial expression as data. Then she set the report down and said full range of motion restored. Strength at 94% of pre-injury baseline. Structural integrity, the labrum repair is holding correctly. The assessment window, Mara said. Medically, you're cleared for return to full physical activity, Doris said. What the training command does with that clearance is their determination. She paused. But medically, yes, you're ready. Mara was quiet for a moment. 3.5 months. She had spent 3.5 months rebuilding a shoulder and rebuilding everything else that needed rebuilding alongside it, the Aaron-shaped space in her chest that had always contained guilt and now contained something more complicated and more honest. The understanding of her own fear that the underwater confidence drill had started and the channel had completed, the changed relationship with what it meant to be seen and recognized, and to receive help without it diminishing anything. "Thank you," she said to Doris. Doris, who was not a demonstrative person and who had learned in 30 years of physical therapy that what patients needed was competence rather than warmth, said, "Don't hurt it again, I'll do my best," Mara said. "Do better than your best," Doris said. "Your best got it hurt in the first place." It was possibly the most accurate thing anyone had said to her in 4 months. She laughed, actually laughed, the kind that comes from somewhere genuine, and Doris almost smiled, which for Doris was the equivalent of a standing ovation. She returned to Coronado on a Monday morning. The bus ride was the same. The gate was the same. Salt air and the particular weight of the Pacific pressing against everything was the same. What was different was internal and therefore invisible to anyone who hadn't known her before, which meant it was visible to exactly 3 people waiting at the staging area when she stepped off. Eli was there. His clavicle had healed on schedule and he had returned to assessment 6 weeks earlier than Mara, which meant he was already deep into the program's advanced phase. He had requested and been granted permission to be at the staging area for this specific morning, which Strickland had approved without requiring extensive justification, because Strickland understood the arithmetic of what moments cost and what they were worth. Grant was there. He had graduated from his assessment phase 3 weeks earlier and was in the pipeline transition period before advanced training began. He was technically not required to be anywhere near Coronado this morning. He was there anyway, in civilian clothes, standing slightly apart from the official proceedings, with the careful positioning of someone who understood his role was witness rather than participant. And Strickland was there, in uniform. At the front of the staging area, with the new assessment class formed up behind him, 37 candidates. Their first morning, their duffel bags still clean, and their expressions still containing the particular mixture of terror and certainty that lasted approximately 48 hours before the certainty component was surgically removed by the Pacific Ocean. Strickland looked at her when she stepped off the bus. She looked at him. He gave her nothing visible, no nod, no acknowledgement, the absolute professional neutrality of an instructor in front of a class, which was its own acknowledgement, and she understood it. She took her position in the formation. She was not the only woman this time. There were 2 others in the new class, a Navy diver named Castellano and a fleet intelligence specialist named Park, and she saw them notice her the way the class had noticed her on the first morning. Months ago, the arithmetic of precedent working in real time. She did not look back at them with reassurance. She did not perform confidence for their benefit. She looked forward at the water, at the same Pacific that had taken Aaron and had given her back twice, and she let her presence speak the only language that mattered here. Strickland began the opening brief. It was the same brief. Same words, same weight, same flat honest voice, delivering the same honest assessment of what the next weeks would require. Mara had heard it once before, had stood in this same position, and absorbed these same sentences with the specific attention of someone who had made a decision so large that every subsequent moment needed to be treated as the preparation for justifying it. This time it landed differently, not because the words had changed, because she had. "This course will find every lie you've told yourself about who you are," Strickland said. Not just the physical ones, all of them. She had found them. She knew what they were now. The lie that surviving meant never feeling afraid. The lie that receiving help was a form of weakness. The lie that the right to be somewhere had to be earned through isolation rather than through contribution. The lie that Aaron's death had told her about her own culpability, which had never been true, and which she had carried for 3 years longer than she should have, because the administrative process that should have corrected it had failed her. She was done with those lies. "Fall in," Strickland said. "Everything after this sentence is an evaluation." Mara fell in. The first evolution of her return was a 4-mile run. She ran it in the middle of the pack, not at the front. Not establishing anything, not performing recovery or demonstrating comeback. Just running at the pace her body found when she asked it for honest effort rather than theater. The shoulder moved through its full range without complaint. The joint that Doris had rebuilt with 10-minute increments and stubborn precision operated the way it was supposed to operate as part of a functional whole, contributing its load without demanding attention. She was aware of the new candidates reading her, the way candidates always read anyone whose presence in the formation was not immediately legible to them. She was older than most of them. Her posture carried something that wasn't rank but functioned similarly, the particular quality of someone who had already been somewhere and come back, which communicated itself through 100 small physical signals that couldn't be manufactured. It pulled up alongside her around mile 2. Young couldn't have been more than 23, with the barely managed energy of someone who was running this fast because anxiety was providing the fuel and would eventually present the bill. "You were here before," the candidate said between breaths. "Someone said you were here before." "Yes," she said. "Medical?" "Yes." "How long were you out?" 3.5 months. He processed that for several strides. "Is it different?" "Coming back?" She thought about it honestly. "The course is the same," she said. "I'm different." "Different how?" "Less afraid of the fear," she said. "More afraid of the things worth being afraid of." He gave her a look that said he was going to need more context for that statement and was simultaneously too oxygen depleted to request it. "Keep your breathing even," she told him. "You're burning the reserve you need for the back half." He adjusted his breathing. The last 2 miles cost him less than the first 2 had. He finished without the tunnel vision collapse that had been developing on his face around the mile 3 mark. He didn't say thank you, he didn't need to. She hadn't done it for the thanks. The evolution that mattered came at the end of the 2nd week. It was the underwater confidence drill. She had known it was coming. She had run it in her mind for 3.5 months of rehabilitation, not obsessively, not in the avoidant circling of someone who couldn't face a thing, but with the methodical attention of someone who understood that the drill was a conversation she needed to complete correctly, on her own terms, with the fear present and managed rather than absent and pretended. She entered the water last in her rotation. Not because she was avoiding it, because she had requested it. Through proper channels, as a matter of training management. Last in meant the most time to observe the evolution from the outside, to read the water, to be fully present in her own body before she asked it to do the thing that had once frozen her for 4 seconds in front of an instructor who might have ended her course for it. The tangled hose was in the 3rd obstacle. She knew it would be the course structure hadn't changed, and she moved toward it with the specific, focused calm of someone who has already had the hard conversation and knows what she's going to say. When the snag happened, her hands were already reading it. Not finding it. Reading it. The difference between a person who encounters a problem and a person who has already understood the structure of it and is now simply executing the solution. She found the origin point. She tracked the tangle. She released it in sequence. Not 1 second. Not 1 fraction of a second. She surfaced correctly. Reported the equipment issue in the correct format. Cleared the pool deck. Strickland was there. He was always there for this evolution, because this evolution produced information that mattered. He looked at her with the flat professional neutrality that was his default register. She looked back at him with the same. Then very briefly, so briefly that a person not paying specific attention would have missed it entirely, he nodded. Once. The nod that meant I saw. I have adjusted the record accordingly. We don't need to discuss this. She moved back to the staging area. The candidate who had run beside her on the first day was watching from the edge of the pool deck. He started. Standard procedure, she said. That's all it is. Learn the procedure and trust it. You didn't look afraid. I was afraid, she said. The whole time. He stared at her. But you didn't. Being afraid and being stopped by fear are different things, she said. That's the whole lesson. Write it down somewhere. He didn't write it down. But she could see him storing it in the place where things go when they're important enough to keep. The graduation ceremony was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Mara had not allowed herself to think about it in advance in any significant detail, Because thinking about endpoints before you reach them was a way of spending energy that belonged to the path. She had focused on the path every evolution, every day. The shoulder held. The joint that Doris had rebuilt with careful stubbornness operated through every carry, every swim, every surf passage, every navigation assessment, without structural failure, and without the grinding deep ache that had tracked her through the first assessment. She was not the fastest candidate in the class, she was not the strongest. She broke no records and set no marks that would be cited in future training cycles as physical achievements. What she was, what the evaluations recorded, and what Strickland's private assessment notes stated in the precise, unembellished language he used for observations that mattered, was the most complete candidate in the class. Technically sound across every water evolution, tactically accurate in every navigation assessment, medically attentive to her team in ways that prevented two small injuries from becoming large ones, capable of delivering critical information to resistant authority figures in ways they could actually receive, capable of receiving critical information from unexpected sources without ego attaching itself to the transaction. The Aaron Vale leadership scenario had been run with this class in week 4. Mara had participated as a curriculum consultant rather than as a candidate. She had recused herself from that evaluation because being assessed on a scenario she had helped design was a conflict she wasn't willing to carry. The class had run it without her, and the debrief had produced 3 hours of discussion that Strickland later described, in one of his characteristically short text messages, as the best leadership conversation this command has had in 5 years. The graduation ceremony began at 800. The hall held the specific charged quiet of a space where earned things were about to be formally recognized, not performed, not announced but recognized, which was different and heavier and more honest. Family members occupied the chairs to the right of the formation. Mara had no family there. She had Eli medically cleared and fully returned to the program, sitting in the section reserved for supporting personnel. She had Grant, who had driven 4 hours the night before and had slept in his car in the parking lot because no one had told him he couldn't. She found out about the car later. When she did, she said nothing about it to him, because saying something would have made it about her gratitude rather than about the fact that he had simply shown up, which was the whole point of showing up. Master Chief Strickland stood at the front of the hall. He delivered remarks that were characteristically shorter than anyone expected and more complete than anyone could have managed with more words. He talked about what the program was actually for, not the production of physical capability, though that was part of it, but the production of people who could function with full integrity under conditions designed to break integrity. People who told the truth when lying was easier. People who gave credit when taking it was available. People who recognized expertise from unexpected sources and acted on it even when acting on it cost them something personally. Then he said this class ran the Aaron Vale leadership scenario in week 4. I want to take a moment to acknowledge what that scenario is named for. The hall was very still. Chief Aaron Vale was an EOD diver who died in a training accident 3 years ago. He was 34 years old. He had a daughter who likes horses. Strickland's voice was even and controlled and carried the weight of someone who had chosen these words carefully over a period of time. He was survived by a partner who went back into the water again and again and again in his name and in his spirit, until she understood that surviving wasn't the debt she owed him. Getting back up was. Nobody moved. The scenario named for him will run in this program for as long as this program exists, Strickland said, because what it teaches that expertise doesn't announce itself through rank or expectation, that the most critical information sometimes comes from the most unexpected source, that the job of leadership is to recognize and act on truth regardless of where it originates. That is not a lesson you learn once. It is a lesson you practice, every evolution, every team. Every time he looked at the formation candidates. Your names. They were called in alphabetical order, which put Mara near the middle. When her name was called, the hall did something she hadn't expected and hadn't prepared for. It went quiet first, the specific silence that precedes something significant. And then Grant stood. He stood before anyone else moved, before the room had a chance to decide what it was going to do, and he stood without drama and without performance. Just the clear physical statement of a man who had decided something and was acting on it. Then Eli stood. Then the 2 female candidates from the new class who had watched her for 3 weeks and been learning something they didn't yet have language for. Then the instructors, then the entire hall. Mara walked forward to receive her qualification in a room that was standing, and she did not allow her face to perform anything, not the emotion she was feeling, which was large and complicated and contained Aaron and Doris, and the cold channel water and the 4 seconds of freeze in the pool, and the 14 months of a restriction that should have been lifted, and the look on Grant's face, the morning she'd Told him that respect was proven through choices made after, not words spoken during. All of it was there, none of it was for display. She took the qualification from Hargrove, who had presided over the review board, and who looked at her with the particular expression of a man who understood what it had cost to get here and respected the cost. "Well done, Ellison," he said. "Thank you, sir," she said. She returned to her position. Afterward, in the brief open time before the next obligations began, Grant found her near the edge of the staging area where she had stood on the first morning, months ago, with one duffel bag and no special insignia, and the weight of Aaron and the sealed restriction and the fear she was trying to learn to own rather than be owned by. He stood beside her and looked at the water. "How does it feel?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "Like the beginning of something," she said. "Not the end." That's not what most people say about graduation. "Most people graduate thinking the hard part is behind them," she said. "I know better." He was quiet for a moment. "What's next?" "Strickland wants to discuss a formal role in the curriculum development. The Vale scenario needs someone to maintain it, to update the technical elements as water operations evolve, to consult on the psychological components." She paused. "And I've been asked to consider an advisory position with the selection assessment team. You'd be evaluating candidates." "I'd be consulting on evaluation standards," she said. "There's a difference." He almost smiled. "You're going to make that distinction every time, aren't you?" "Probably," she said. He looked at the water. "I told my father about you," he said, "about the whole thing. The channel, what you did, what I did wrong, and what I did right." He was quiet for a long time, and then he said that the bravest thing a person can do is change their mind when the evidence is real. She looked at him. "Your father sounds like someone worth becoming," she said. He absorbed that. "I'm working on it," he said. Eli appeared beside them, because Eli always appeared when the moment was complete enough to receive him. He had coffee, 3 cups, which he distributed with the efficiency of a man who had anticipated the need before it was stated. "Castellano rang out yesterday," he said, meaning one of the female candidates from the new class. "Park is still in." "I know," Mara said. "I talked to Park last night." Eli raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About the underwater confidence drill," she said. "About fear. About the difference between being afraid and being stopped." "What did she say?" "She said she was afraid of being afraid." "What did you tell her?" Mara looked at the water. "At the Pacific that didn't care who you were and didn't adjust its standards and had taken Aaron and had given her back every single time. I told her that the fear is the most honest thing in the water," she said. "It tells you exactly what the stakes are. The question isn't whether you feel it. The question is whether you can still move your hands while you do." The 3 of them stood there for a moment, the EOD diver who had come back, the fleet sailor who had grown into something larger than his certainty, the corpsman who had seen all of it from the beginning and had never once looked away, and the Pacific did what it always did. And the morning did what mornings did, and none of them needed to say anything else. Somewhere behind them in the new assessment class staging area, a nervous candidate was standing in the cold and questioning whether she had what it took, and the men around her were doing the same arithmetic that had always been done, and the ocean was waiting with the same indifference it had always offered to everyone who ever stood on that sand. Mara turned from the water and walked back toward the staging area. Because there was work to do. Because the course didn't end at graduation, it just changed its name. Because Aaron had said it first, and she had learned to say it back. And now she understood that the saying of it was not a farewell but a covenant, renewed each time a person chose the hard thing over the easier one, chose the truth over the comfortable version, chose to go back under rather than wait on the surface. Come back up she had. And the woman who had once stepped off a bus in the dark with one bag and a sealed record and a fear she hadn't yet learned to carry, that woman had not been replaced by someone stronger. She had become someone who knew, with the kind of certainty that only comes from being tested all the way to the foundation and finding the foundation intact, that the fear and the strength had always been the same thing. She had just needed the ocean to show her.